Welcome to Rydal Mount. I'm Dorothy Wordsworth. I'm 63, I've never married, and without a doubt the most loved and most influential person in my life has been my brother William. But I also have fond memories of our great friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge, so like William in many ways. My earliest recollections are of a happy home in Cockermouth, where I lived with my parents and 4 brothers, William being 1 year older than me. Our father was the legal representative for one of the richest men in the country, James Lowther, the Earl of Lonsdale. I well remember father working at his desk and my mother entertaining in the drawing room, whilst we children happily played in the garden and often baked cakes from cook in the kitchen. When our mother died suddenly, closely followed by our father, I was just 12 years old. The house which belonged to the Earl was closed down. He refused to pay the huge debt he owed my father, and we children were sent to live with various relatives. William and I did not meet again for 9 years. We were finally united when a mutual friend offered us the use of a house in Dorset, Racedown Lodge. It had a forbidding exterior and an ugly facade, but it was rent-free, and the beautiful surrounding countryside easily made up for the house. During his time at Cambridge, William had become friends with a young man called Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He had a brilliant way with words, and at that time was making a modest living as a writer, lecturer and critic. After several weeks with William and I, Samuel moved to Bristol, where he met and married, in my opinion, a rather unsuitable girl called Sarah Fricker. She was one of 3 sisters, and although attractive and well brought up, was not of Samuel's intellect. Samuel had had a lonely and sad upbringing. He was the son of the rather eccentric vicar of a splendid-looking church in Ottery St Mary in Devon, the youngest of 10 children. He told us that his playground had been the churchyard. He was never a healthy child and spent all of his time reading books. Indeed, by the age of just 3, he could read a chapter of the Bible. His father died when Samuel was 9 years old, and he was sent away to boarding school, where he told us he had been depressed, moping and friendless. Nevertheless, he excelled and went on to complete his education at Jesus College, Cambridge. Samuel and Sarah had been married a year when, with very little money, they moved to a dilapidated cottage in Nether Stowey in Somerset. By that time they had a baby son, Hartley, and Samuel had ideas of becoming self-sufficient by keeping chickens and pigs and growing his own vegetables. He was, of course, totally unsuited and spent most of his time chatting to his neighbour and benefactor, Tom Poole. The cottage was a disaster. The whole place was damp, the fires smoked constantly, water had to be drawn from a well in the garden, the kitchen had no oven, so Sarah had to carry pies to the village baker in order to be cooked. Oh, and there were rats. Samuel was unhappy and frequently unwell. He turned to the only relief available, laudanum. Samuel begged us to join him in Somerset, and we had no hesitation in agreeing. We rented a rather grand property, Alfoxden House, just a few miles from the Coleridges. It was a large house set amongst trees and with a wild garden that I loved. William, Samuel and I were able to roam the hills and the Quantock's grassy ridge, and we walked both during the day and the night. We endlessly discussed a new form of poetry, lyrical ballads. We trekked for miles, and our greatest expense was shoe repairs. On one of these walks, near a small village called Watchet. We were looking from St Declement's Church out over the grey Bristol Channel, and Samuel was inspired to write one of his finest works, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. William collaborated with him and suggested the killing of the albatross. As I remember it, Samuel penned the first few lines inside the Bell Inn in Watchet.
Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink.
Samuel's addiction to laudanum increased, and it influenced his work. Apparently, on a day in October 1797, he was walking from Lynmouth to his home in Nether Stowey, when, feeling unwell, he stopped to rest at Ash Farm, a remote place high on Exmoor. The farmer's wife showed him into the parlour and gave him some food. He took a few drops of laudanum to relieve his pain, and then turned to the book he was reading about Xanadu, the exotic palace of the Mughal ruler Kublai Khan. Induced by the drug, he soon fell asleep and experiencing vivid and disturbing dreams. When he awoke, he quickly started to write down a description of the fantasies he had just seen. But before he had time to finish, there was a knock at the door, and the farmer said,
"There's a person from Porlock to see you, Mr. Coleridge."
Samuel said the person stayed for 2 hours, and when they left he was mortified that he only had a dim recollection of his dream and could not finish the work. Well, he never did tell us who called, and between you and me, I thought it was just an excuse. However, it was published in 1800 and is now acclaimed as one of his finest works.
In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea.
All too soon, our idyllic time in the Quantocks came to an end when the owner of Alfoxden House refused to extend our lease. We decided to return to the Lake District and move to Grasmere, where we rented Dove Cottage. It was small but cosy and became our home for the next 8 years. And just as we had followed Samuel to the Quantocks, Samuel and his family followed us to the Lake District, renting part of a large house known as Greta Hall. But our lives were changing. In 1802, William married a kind and gentle lady, Mary Hutchinson, and whilst we were living at Dove Cottage, their first 3 children were born. We saw less of Samuel, but William continued writing about our beautiful Lake District.
Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze.
Samuel's dependency on laudanum increased, and he was a difficult husband and father. He later left Sarah and their children and went to London. Meanwhile, we were finding Dove Cottage far too small for William's growing family. In 1813, we moved to this lovely house, Rydal Mount, where we are finally settled. We have a magnificent garden where William spends most of his time. The rooms are large and comfortable. William's favourite chair sits by the window, and his couch is close by.
Oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude.
So, my story draws to a close. I live here peacefully with my beloved William and his wife Mary. Sadly, Samuel never did manage to rid himself of his opium addiction, and he died earlier this year. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I have enjoyed your visit immensely.